Cloud. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rebecca Snyder, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, DC Press Association. We are delighted today to have Diana Sugg to talk to us about things she wished she knew when she was a rookie reporter. And so Diana has reported for the AP in Philadelphia, the Spartanburg Herald Journal, the Sacramento Bee, and the Baltimore Sun. She's won national prizes for her crime and medical reporting, including the Pulitzer for beat reporting at the Baltimore Sun. In the last several years, she's discovered her second love, which is nurturing reporters and enterprise stories at the Sun and elsewhere. She's edited several award-winning projects on subjects, including the collateral damage to children from gun violence, police corruption, the struggle to integrate schools, and the emotional journey of one reporter from foster mom to adoptive mother. Sugg's work is featured in journalism textbooks, and she has spoken widely to journalists around the country and served on the Poynter Institute's National Advisory Board. So I'm delighted that she's here with us today, and I will turn it over to her. Diana?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm going to tell you a little story first, and then I'm going to share my screen. First, it's really an honor to be here with so many journalists who are all doing what I'm still trying to do, which is to get better and learn and take your work to the next level. The little story I'm going to start with is the day I started as a reporter at the Spartanburg Herald Journal in South Carolina. And I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning that there was a double fatal fire in a home outside the city. And I was very young. I had worked at the Associated Press, but I was mostly doing stories, working the phone for stories. And I really wanted to be out in the community. So I went out there that day, and they were clearing everything up. There were a lot of TV reporters there. You started asking questions, and gradually I kind of caught wind of the firefighters kind of whispering about something. And it was the detail that every single window in the house was nailed shut from the outside. And a mother and daughter basically burned to death, smoke inhalation inside the house. So they did their little press conference, and I did by instinct what we should all always do, which is wait a little bit till the reporters leave and people are cleaning up and everyone thinks they have their story, their standard story. And I started trying to talk to a couple of the firefighters, and I heard somebody mention Wicked Wanda. Wicked Wanda finally died. They wouldn't tell me anything about it. So I did a second tip, which I heartily urge you to do, even though a lot of people have sometimes scary dogs, which is to go to the neighbors, go knock on the doors. People will tell you, I don't really know anything about them. You know, they moved in here 3.5 years ago, and they always close their blinds at 5 o'clock at night. And that weird man comes over here at 10 and starts shouting at them, but I really don't know who they are. I saw this and I saw that and I saw that. Anyway, I went to several doors, and it turned out that Wanda Zimmerman, the daughter, had a mental illness, and they could not get the help she needed, long story short. And her father had nailed the window shut to help keep her inside the house, essentially sealing her death and his wife's death when this fire started. And I remember going back to the newsroom that day, and I remember thinking there was the standard story. There was the story that everybody else was going to write. Sad story, 2 women die in a fire, and it would be maybe like an 8-inch brief. And wouldn't that be sad? And maybe there would be a short follow-up. And I was going to write the main story, but there was a second story whose first sentence was going to be, they called her Wicked Wanda, and about this woman and how they could never get the help that they needed. And I still remember so clearly sitting in the newsroom at the Spartanburg Herald Journal on my first day. And up until that point, I had thought maybe I wanted to be a reporter. I had been an English major at Villanova. I worked on my college newspaper. I was the editor of the college newspaper. I interned at Philadelphia Magazine. I went to work for a community paper outside Philadelphia and got paid $5 an inch for covering court. I went to Poynter for a fellowship. I even managed to land AP Philadelphia reporting job, which was all great experience. But I have to tell you, and I don't know where any of you are in your own journey, but it wasn't until that moment, sitting there writing They Called Her Wicked Wanda, that I realized this is why I'm here. This is what I want to do. I'm a natural. This is what it is. It's brains, it's heart, it's hard work, it's integrity, it's empathy, it's listening, and it's writing something that is gonna, even if it's not going to change a law, even if it's not Watergate, it's something that people will remember her, or maybe someone else won't make fun of someone who's mentally ill. And there were things that happened out of that. So I had that realization, okay, I love this. I know now this really, really, truly is what I want to do. But it would take me years from that moment to gain the bigger perspective I wish I had then, the understanding, the mindset of how to operate as a reporter in a way that was truly meaningful and where I could do my best work, because there's so many obstacles. So that's what I kind of want to talk with you about today. And let me share my screen. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. I'm just trying to get this to.
Yeah, I think now if you go to slide, you weren't clicked on your enter full screen. Yeah, perfect. And we can see your screen and your slideshow.
Okay. Okay, great. And let's see. So I just told you guys a little bit about this first day. That's a picture of the Spartanburg Herald Journal there on the first day. And this gets to something that I think everybody really needs to think about beyond your kind of internship and getting a job and trying to get on the front page, is really the much more personal question that gets kind of to the soul of your work. Why are you doing this? What is your philosophy? It's almost like putting on your headset and going into this career and saying, why am I here? And really asking yourself that question. And the thing I would say that all the veterans here know, and that the young people may kind of know or not know, that I think it's really good to embrace and accept up front, is that this is difficult. It is long hours. The pay is not super. There's a lot of deadlines. You are going to have a lot of times where you think the editor is crazy. You're having to work too hard. You're eating lunch at your desk. I remember many times in Spartanburg and in Sacramento, marching off into the bathroom and crying and saying, why are they taking me off this great story? I should be doing this other story. Maybe I should be a social worker. Maybe I can do more. But I'm here to tell you, after many years, that all those short stories, all those dailies, every single interview you do, it all counts. It all matters. It all adds up to experience. You may have a story that you don't think is interesting or important or you're upset about, and I can guarantee you're almost always going to make a connection with someone. You're going to find one little nugget, one little detail, and it is going to help paint the picture that you're filling out of your beat and your work. So I think to embrace it as like, yeah, I'm going to have hard days here, but it's going to be worth it. And then the second really key point to remember is you can craft your own path in this field. That's what's so amazing about it. You can focus on certain kinds of stories. No matter what beat you're on, you're going to learn something. But if you're interested in another beat, you can quietly try to do one or two stories on that beat and almost make that like your minor and transition. So in many ways, you have a lot of power to use your own curiosity, your own interests, the things that you think should be written about, and really advocate for them and get them out there, really like almost no other job. So it's truly a vocation and a calling. Now, I often think to this fantastic woman journalist and editor, Jackie Banaszewski. This is her covering the famine in Africa many years ago. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner out of St. Paul Pioneer Press, and an editor in Seattle, and a night chair at Missouri. But Jackie has a theory, and I think this is really important to keep in mind, that there's 4 kinds of people in this world. The first group walks down the street and doesn't notice anything. The second kind of person walks down the street and sees something, thinks nothing of it, and walks on. The third person walks down the street, sees something, and decides they know what it is and makes a judgment, and then walks on. The fourth person, the true journalist, the person you want to be, is the person who walks down the street, notices something, turns your head and says, "What in God's name is that? What is that?" That's who you want to be. And that's the next thing. Before we kind of get to the skills of reporting, writing, interviewing, and all those necessary skills, I really got to tell you today that what's so important is everything around that. Again, mindset, philosophy, how you go into this. And attitude is number 1. Be humble, be open. People are very smart and very sensitive. When you're working on a story, if they think you've decided you already know what the story is, they will shut down and they will not tell you anything. They will size you up in a hot minute by the sound of your voice on the phone, how you look on Zoom. And if in the best case scenario, and I beg of you, go in person, meet people in person, you will be sized up, and the amount of information you get is in direct amount to who you are as a person. Do you seem like you care? Do you seem like you're listening? And it's not just outside the newsroom on your stories. It's inside the newsroom with the editors. The jokes about, this is a terrible story idea, or we've done that before, or whatever it might be. You know what? Don't look down at suggestions. Even stories that might not seem like a lot can turn into something a lot. So I would really encourage you to let go of cynicism and be open. Two key questions anytime you're looking at a story. Why am I doing this story? And why are we doing this story now? Those are questions you need to ask. Like, why are we really doing this? What is happening in this moment that we should be writing this story? And what is different now? Number 2, touching base early and often with your editor. I know right now, and I know for a long time, it has been difficult sometimes to get time with editors, but this is the most important thing you can do, even if you can run over there for 5 minutes, is saying, what's the bottom line here? What do we think the story is? What are we trying to get? What are the possible pathways? We know we've written about it XYZ way, but today what's different is this, and we're going to focus on that angle. We think this is probably what it is, but it might turn out to be something else. So let's see. So the last thing you want to do is have a quote unquote assignment, walk away, and then come back with some story without any conversation. Text your editor, email, say like, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that. What do you think? And always get down to the kernel of what is the story really about? Every story is like a beautiful plant, buried in some soil. There's some sort of foundation there. There's some sort of theme underneath it. Wicked Wanda was about 2 women who died in a fire. What was it really about? It was really about someone who untreated mental illness, lack of health insurance in society. what was it even broader? What was even the broader theme? Was the broader theme discrimination, love, struggle? Try to articulate what those themes are, and that will help guide everything about the story. I often imagine stories as like this house is kind of run down, but this big, gorgeous, old, rambling house, right? And I think a lot of times as reporters, because of time and because we're geared that way, we pull up in the front, we go up to the story, the house, and we go up to that front porch and we step in, and maybe someone opens the door a little bit and we're in the living room and we're talking to them and they're saying, it's really hot. My air conditioning's broken. BG&E hasn't been working, whatever it might be. Well, but what we don't do is make enough of a connection to actually get inside the house, to like go down the hallway to another room, to maybe discover that there's actually a fire burning in there, or what's happening in kind of the last room at the end of the hall. We're all writing the stories on the porch. We're all writing the living room stories, what everyone expects and thinks. How often are you surprised by a story? Where is there something different? Are we telling the same stories? So I really encourage you. A lot of times you've got to write the living room porch story, but what I'm encouraging you to do is think about what's beyond that. What's in the back room? What's upstairs? What haven't we written about? And I'm going to hit some quick golden rules about interviewing. Make a list of questions ahead of time. Have that list of questions, write down every single question you have. Every single person you interview, you got to Google them ahead of time. Look them up, see like, oh, here was a little story on them about their neighborhood. Here was this, here was that. There's nothing worse than going in, not knowing anything about the person, having the person say, oh, well, the Business Journal did a story on this very thing like last year. Do your research ahead of time. You have so much at your fingertips with the internet. Read over everything about the person. Other key thing, which the young reporters may not know, is that people often reporters want to keep talking. Be quiet, let them talk, ask a question and sit quietly. And often someone feels kind of compelled to like fill the void and say more. So let them go. It's also helpful to tape your interviews and then just listen later. And many reporters will be shocked at how often they're trying to bring in their own point of view and say, oh, that happened to me. The quieter you are, the better. I still was having reporters that were ending up with names spelled wrong at times, or not referring to people right. It's really smart to just say at the end of every single interview, let me just go over this. I know this is silly. I know your name is John Smith. Can we just go over the spelling? And sure enough, it'll be spelled S-M-Y-T-H-E or something crazy like that. And then, I often say, well, how do you like to be referred to? What's the best way to describe you? You're just an architect, or no, I'm an architect who specializes in urban row homes, or I am a scientist who has studied the interactions of jellyfish in the environment for 20 years. Like, give us those little descriptors, and they are often the best person, unless it's an investigation, to help you get that description. Other thing, last 3 key questions at the end is always, is there anything else I did not ask you that I should have asked you? Number 2, is there anything else you want to say? And number 3, is there anyone else I should talk to? And you could have talked to that person for 2 hours, but at the end, after they've seen that you're patient and listening and you're furiously scribbling things down, when you say to them, is there anything I should have asked that I didn't? And then they might say, well, actually, did you know that 2 years ago there was a body, buried 2 doors down? They sometimes, come out with some other thing. They'll often use that time also to like kind of sum up and say, they might give you the quote you really need because now they're almost like warmed up. And then, is there anyone else I should talk to? They might say, you know, there was this one guy, XYZ. Oh, do you have the number? And of course, then how can I reach you? What are the best ways to reach you? Is there a personal email? Because I like to double check things. I'm sorry, I won't try to bother you, but I'm a little bit obsessive about making sure everything's right, because later, if you're not sure, they know, oh, this person's trying to double check, and you can call back and text and say, is this right? Or was it really that? You would not believe how many layers there are of the onion. And this leads into something that doctors refer to as the hand on the doorknob syndrome. Physicians have found, and it's been studied, that often it's only when they're about to leave the room at the end of an exam that a patient will sometimes come out with the truth. And the classic example of this is a woman who's in with stomach pain, and they're examining and they've run tests, and the doctor's saying, I really don't know. We can't figure this out. Okay, we're going to try this. We're going to try that. And the doctor walks to the door, and at the last second, the woman says, as the doctor has her hand on the doorknob, says, could this have anything to do with my husband stabbing me there 2 years ago? So remember the hand on the doorknob. Reporting is where the gold is. You can get any writing tip you want, and I'm going to go over some writing strategies. You will never write a great story if you do not have the reporting. You are truly a curious George. You are a detective. You are a historian. You are using everything from phoning to talking people to records. Track that story out. And I think we often make the mistake of saying, I just need these 3 people. I have my 3 people, and that's all I need. Mistake. Don't think that every story is like this little template. Yeah, sure. Sometimes you have to write, someone was killed on a street or whatever, but you'll often find out the story behind the story. Okay. So Connie Cornelius, mother of 5 in California, 52 years old, driving home from helping out at a prom night party meant to keep kids from not driving, an anti-drunk driving thing. Driving home at 10 o'clock at night, and at the exact moment she goes through this intersection a mile from her home, a drunk driver plows through her, smashes her up against the thing, and she's killed. So I covered that story, and when I went and talked to the neighbors, they talked about coming outside and how odd it was because everything was just such a mess, but somehow like her white sweater almost was like laid over the window and her head was on it really gently in this almost angelic tableau, which was so similar to how she led her life. So that was one story. But then it turned out that that intersection was a really bad intersection, and that family had heard that terrible crash multiple times. So keep going on some of these stories. You don't have to write it that day, but you don't be afraid to drill down and to ask more questions. This is a picture of me in the hardest story of my life, which was writing about how terminally ill children are treated in America. And this is an example of what I think of kind of as like the piece of pizza type philosophy, which is that we often write broad, vague stories. Crime is bad. Infrastructure is bad. You have to drill down and get to a narrower thing. This story in broad terms could have been how terminally ill people are treated at the end of life, or just children with cancer. But it kept what it was really the core of it was really when someone said to me, we're doing things to these children that we might not do to our own pets because we cannot let go of them, and nobody wants to give up on a child. So no one's telling them that they're dying. They're being put through really horrific procedures because everybody wants to try every single thing that they can. And this story took 2 years to get in on the inside of it. I just was doing other stories and I just kept knocking on the doors and knocking on the doors and knocking on the doors. That's RJ Voigt, by the way, 11 years old, 4 years of cancer. Let's see.
Hello, this is Rebecca.
Let's see. How much time do we have left? I know we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to kind of get through this. If you guys are starting new, I think there's people covering real estate, people covering DEI, education, freelance for the Afro, someone covering local government. Find the guides, find the connectors. There's always somebody who's behind the scenes who knows a lot. Get coffee with them. Stay in touch with them. Read all the other stories that have come before. Ask all the new people on your beat, what are the stories that you guys wish someone had written that have never been written before? Writing strategies. Again, this gets down to what is your focus? Go for the most interesting, different, compelling angle. The more you focus, the more interesting. The best stories are small stories within bigger stories. Take Schindler's List, a chapter from World War II. Band of Brothers, a chapter from World War II. The story of these dying children was one piece inside the huge expanse of healthcare and hospice and cancer, et cetera. Another key thing, when you are trying to jam a lot of stuff in the story, Roy Peter Clark says, cut, don't condense. I used to try to just like summarize the paragraph to a sentence and tell my wonderful editor, Patricia Fanning, can I get in this point? Can I get in this point? No, take it out and save it and build another story of it. And also sometimes I used to think of what is a theme song? You should think about what is a theme song of yourself as a reporter? What is the theme song of the story? I remember working on one with Erica Green about juvenile justice, and there was this great rocking Adele story. And I was like, that's the theme song for this story. I had a reporter, Talia Richmond, that I gave her like a theme song for her freshman year at the Sun, her sophomore year, like each year, it's like, what's the feel of this? If you're working on a story, if it's a little bit longer one, storyboards are great. Write down like notes, quotes, ideas, thoughts, and it can kind of inspire you and help you move the chunks around. Here's one where you can see some of the quote, like this key quote, I just want to go home. Victoria up here in the corner, they trap you. I put pictures up, and that just helps really kind of make it vivid. When you're at your desk or when you come back from reporting, and please, again, try to go out in the field as much as you can. Scribble down lines, scribble down thoughts. If you've witnessed something, just write that scene down. You should start writing chunks along the way. Start a Google Doc. Even start asking yourself questions. What is this story really about? Doctors actually have what they call a parallel chart, and it's the secret chart. It's not the chart the patient sees now or the official chart, but it's like thoughts about what's really going on with this patient. This is my sketch of a terrific exercise that Jackie Banaszewski does, and everybody should really do, which is, what is your story process? What are the steps you take from the time you start a story to the time you finish a story? So I apologize for my poor, I'm obviously not an artist, but I hope you guys go through this because this can help you figure out maybe where you're getting stuck in your process. And I'll give you the quick rundown on me. This is me, idea. Oh my God, this is so great. I love this. I found this thing. This is so great. Then before I go to the editor, my scoping, I'm scoping it out. I'm seeing who else wrote about it. What does it mean? Is there a national context? Who might I do? I start kind of cooking it up. Then I go to the editor. Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. This is so great. And the editor might be like, well, again, do not be depressed. Do not be upset. That's okay. You will convince them through your reporting. Now I'm in the world of the story, my favorite place to be. Interviewing, reporting. Oh my God, I'm getting so much stuff. This is so great. This story is going to be this beautiful, gorgeous, luminous sphere. And I'm just imagining it and feeling it. Now I come to my angst step. Oh my God, wait a minute. Where is my beautiful, luminous sphere? What is the story really about? I'm getting overwhelmed. Then I'm like, focus. I've got to focus. What is the story really, really about? Okay, here I am cutting it up and making my pretty little shirt. Here's my story. Then I'm trying to finish it. I'm going to go to the land of the storyboard. Oh, great. I have all these great quotes. Okay. Oh, yeah, that part fits here. That part fits here. I might go back to angst from there. Then I start to write. Then I might have more angst. Then I go to editing. I might have more angst. You will have your own version of this, but you should think about, where do you get stuck? Are you getting stuck in the writing? If you're getting stuck in the writing, have you really thought through what's the story really about? And often, if you are stuck in the writing or the focusing or the editing, the answer is almost always 99% of the time, more reporting. You don't understand enough. You don't know enough to figure out exactly what it is. And again, I know we're running out of time. There's so much to talk about. Let me just hit a couple other highlights. When you are stuck, get up, walk around. There are some people, one reporter I know who cleans a little bit, and that helps her think about her story. Talk to someone you know who doesn't like the story. Who's the person in the newsroom who thinks your story is sappy or not important? Talk to them, and when they come back at you and say, yeah, but is it this, that, or that? That'll help you make your story stronger. Another thing is there's like I think it's Norwegian, I can't remember the term for it, but they do this 30-minute focus sprint. Tell yourself, set a timer and say, I have 30 minutes to write this story and I cannot do anything else. And often the very act of just saying, I only have 30 minutes will help you get something out, and then you can start building momentum. Revision is often where the best writing happens. I don't know what phases you guys are in your writing, but I remember thinking, oh my God, here's this white page. The first line has to be so great. And I would write it and I have like 3 sentences and I go back up to the top and every single thing has to be perfect before I can get to the rest of this. No, you don't have to do that. It's like, okay, it doesn't have to come out perfect. In fact, most of the best writers, it doesn't come out perfect. They do it multiple times. So write whatever you can write a nut graph, put in, quotes from one guy, just go ahead and put some chunks in, and then you gradually start crafting it together. And it's really when you go through a second thing and write it again, whether it's in one day, you kind of hack it out and then you go back and say, okay, I'm going to clean this up. That's where the really strong writing comes from. I mean, people think that Michelangelo and Da Vinci and all these people, oh my God, genius is so amazing. No, Michelangelo practiced the Pietà multiple times. He did that multiple times before he ever did the final one. So it's okay. It's not supposed to come out perfect right away. Importance of editors. There's a lot of, you're going to have great editors. You're going to have good editors. You're going to have editors you struggle with. Whoever you have, do your best to develop a good relationship with them. Figure out if you're struggling, figure out what makes them tick, figure out what you can learn from them. You can learn something from everyone. Go to people who've known them a long time and understand oh, you know what? They really like this kind of story, or this is what they like. Go to lunch with them, talk to them, get to know who they are, make a bond with this person. Find other people in the newsroom to brainstorm with, learn who the people are. I remember at one point in one of the newsrooms I was in, there were so many reporters per editor. It was just really hard for my own editor, who's I loved, to really have time to talk about the stories. I found someone on the copy desk who was super smart and interested in healthcare policy that I was covering at that point, who I could go and bounce ideas off of. And that becomes almost like a physics thing, where just talking to someone else who's interested helps make you more excited about it. So it's really important. And you can find a lot of kind of these ad hoc people to be someone to get advice, to talk to. And remember, sometimes the one story you don't want to do is going to be a key to a jewel. I remember what I thought was a boring Medicaid policy story that the fantastic Patricia Fanning was like, you need to do this. And it was, like a daily story about policy. And there was one line in that story. And that one line led to like one of my most favorite stories ever. Be organized, like vertical files, whether they're paper like this or they're in your computer. People have different levels of like messiness and all that, but like you really should like have like a list of all your sources, details on the sources. You should have a running list of story ideas, short, medium, long. You should be cooking some kind of cool, interesting stories. So let's say you're an intern for the summer and you're getting stories every day, but there's one thing that's kind of caught your eye. Maybe it's a profile, maybe it's a feature. Talk to your editor and see if it's something you can work on a little bit at a time, an hour here, an hour there, and kind of nurture. You should always have one special story you're working on. Think of it as a plant. I remember Kevin Merida talking about this. He's now the LA Times editor. It's like a plant you water every day. I used to keep a file for that. And sometimes when I first got into work or at the end of the day, I would open it up and I would make a FOIA request or I would do something. And I remember at reporters saying, well, I don't have time, or I've tried for 2 weeks, I can't get it. 2 weeks, that's nothing. If you can go 2 years, there's so many stories to do, you can keep the special ones cooking on the back burner. Read. I've got Roy Peter Clark's writing tools, fantastic. Chip Scanlon, Writing for Story. There's a ton of great ones. If you want, I can send more suggestions. Find the reporters you really love, follow them on Twitter. Remember, the best journalists never stop learning. That is the mantra of the Poynter Institute NewsU. There are so many great resources, so many more than there ever were before. Free seminars. As Rebecca was saying, MDDC has all these great things on YouTube you can watch. Neiman Storyboard, that's Jackie's baby. Every Friday, she puts out a newsletter. She analyzes stories, writes about all this. Solutions journalism, that's a whole nother world, solutions journalism. You can go online and explore them. There are terrific beat-specific organizations. A lot of them students can sign up for, of course, NABJ, et cetera. So like, get yourself linked in, get all the newsletters, get the emails, follow them on Twitter. So much inspiration, so much advice. It's fantastic. And remember, there was a famous woman years ago, you guys will never remember, you guys won't know her. She was an actress, Marlo Thomas. Her dad was like a TV producer. She was in a TV show about a single girl. She was actually the producer and the writer of the show, but they couldn't put it in the credits because nobody would want to watch a show, or they couldn't get funding for a show done by a woman. And she was upset and she asked her father about it. And he said, baby, I raised you to be a thoroughbred. Thoroughbred wear blinders. So thoroughbred horses actually have blinders on either side. So when you're in the newsroom and you're seeing other people maybe getting on the front page, or you feel like someone's the favorite, or you're having a hard time, or you're thinking, I'm not where I thought I would be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, put your blinders on and run your own race. Run your own race. Find one good story and focus on it one at a time. And see what good that you can do in this world. Gene Patterson, who founded the Poynter Institute and the St. Pete Times, his saying was, don't just make a living, make a mark. And I'm just going to say to all of you, whoever wants to ask questions, it was wonderful. I wish we could have been in person, but onward to some great stories. So thank you.
Diana, thank you so much for that. That was truly inspirational. I love the way that you kind of set out some real strategic aspects of how to be a journalist and a really effective reporter. So I'm going to open it up to the people in the room. Do y'all have questions for Diana? I know no harm if people have to drop off, but if you want to stay and chat a little bit, what questions might you have for Diana? And while people are formulating and thinking, I know a couple people had asked, well, like, how do I develop that beat? And I know we have got a great session from Chris Harvey on that, but like all that strategic framework is really helpful. But like when you get plunked down into a place you don't know, or even a topic you don't know, how do you find your way through? What's your tip?
I would go back and see whoever was on the beat before you, go back and read a bunch of their stories, and then figure out who some of the key people are. So when I landed in the Sacramento Bee, I think I was 23 years old. I was going to be a night GA. I'd never been west of the Mississippi. I landed and they said, we're moving you. Actually, you're going to be night cops, 5 to 1 a.m., Tuesdays through Saturdays. The police department hated the newspaper. They felt like they hadn't gotten a fair shake. They gave me a list and said, these are this is the night watch people. You call all the sheriff's departments, all the police departments, the paper's full. By the time you get here, all you have to do is briefs. So I called and I said, can I come meet I said, I'm a new person. Can I come meet the watch commander? So a couple of days later, I ended up having dinner with the captain and the lieutenant. And then that started getting to know them. And I actually started going to the scenes and finding stories. And it didn't matter to me if the paper was full for the next day because I could come up with features. So I would say it's a lot of the classic kind of go in with fresh eyes and don't necessarily do it the way the person did it before you. And look for the stories and get to know people and listen to them, because then it'll turn out, oh, we're starting like a bike cop thing at night. So I got my bike and went with the cops on the bike thing, or I started hearing about weird crimes I would cover.
Okay, so it sounds like getting a lot of those same things apply. You Google's your friend, you first do a little summary research, then you figure out who the players are, and then you start to get involved and you get out from behind your desk and behind your phone and actually go out and report.
Right. I mean, the one that was really hard was when they moved me from cops to covering healthcare when Hillary Clinton started her whole healthcare reform. Mm-hmm. And I was in California, which was like a hotbed for it with single payer and all that. And I didn't know anything about it. So I remember every night cutting out all these stories from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and trying to understand all this health policy. And you really do you're just a learner. It's like you're studying it. It's like, okay, who's the health officer for Sacramento City? Who's the health officer for the county? I'm going to meet with them. What are the key things that are going on now? What are the things that have been going on? What's coming down the pike? It is intimidating. And that's why you're kind of a combination of a detective, a curious George, a historian, and your curiosity can lead you down different things. Really, the things that you're interested in, you can often get the paper to write about because there's so much going on. It's almost like you can craft a mini beat within your beat. Like every year on my beat, I would have almost like a different theme. It would be like, well, this year we're writing a lot about the Medicaid stuff because that's a big deal for this year. You can't do everything all at once. And I think that's a really important thing to know about your beat, that you have to let some of it go. And I remember trying to shift from the school mode of I have homework and I have to do all these classes and all this homework. And now here I am in a job and there's all this stuff and I'm just never going to get to all of it. And that's where you talk about focus and trying to think what's most important. What haven't we written about? Okay, the paper's covered this a lot. Maybe it's time to turn to this, but there's no hard and fast rules. And a person's own interest can often shape what comes out. The other medical reporter at the Sun did a lot about medical discoveries and findings in journals, I found myself more gravitating towards what we didn't know in the dark corners of medicine and things that were in the shadows. So I wrote about those things. But you have to be able to justify it. You have to have that nut graph that can say, this is affecting X number of people. We've never covered it. We're at this crucial turning point in medicine. Like, you've got to have that base to justify the story to the editor.
That makes perfect sense.
I had a question, actually. Yeah, I was just curious about, because I had this issue literally yesterday. Because you mentioned, you know, like being a beat reporter takes time. I think that's like the one difference that I'm really recognizing from transitioning from like internship to full-time job. And sometimes that means maybe not getting to do like a breaking story that day, or maybe taking a time to do an interview that might not necessarily directly translate into a story today, but might be good background for something else. I'm curious about, like, when you're reporting, especially as a beat reporter, what was your split in terms of, like, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, you have to be current, you have to read what's coming out, you have to also keep up with your sources, you have to also keep producing content. How did you kind of manage your time?
Well, part of it depended on the beat. When I was on night cops and day cops, a lot of that was driven by the daily stuff. There will always be the breaking story you have to do, but then there will be the slow time. So I think the way I managed it was thinking of it, and I think, Oyen, I might have even said this to you before, like a cook, like you can scramble an egg in a couple minutes on the front of the stove, but on the back, even if you're trying to cook something, like if I'm trying to cook pasta for my sons, that take 10 minutes. I have to keep stirring it. So the key is to be flexible and to be able to shift quickly and to be able to say, maybe you think one day you're going to get to work on the story, but something happens and you can't. I remember being so upset about that, but just like being able to like put it in the file, put it aside, I'll come back to it. I think it goes in runs like basketball. It's like a game of runs. You might go on a run of having a lot of stuff. It's super busy. Then it might be kind of calm. But the key is to keep that one hand free to jump in and do breaking when you need it, but to have something important to you, medium, those medium stories are nice, like something that's a little bit more substantial that gets you into something but isn't going to take forever, and then maybe something longer that you really want to do on the back burner. Like I said, in cops, if you're covering City Hall, you're writing a lot of daily stuff. You're covering higher ed, you're trying to write a lot about HBCUs, you're going to be maybe not so crazy daily wise, right? So I think what you want to think of each day when you come in is, what are the couple key things you're going for that day? You're going to try to make X progress on this story, and you're maybe going to try to talk to a couple people. I used to, during lunch, I would subscribe to all these listservs because there's just so much stuff about health. And I would just like scan through those. Like sometimes I would just take 10 or 15 minutes and kind of scan through, oh, here's Kaiser Family Foundation. Here's something from NIH. Or reports that I would get at my desk. I would just do some scanning. Sometimes your eye would land on that one detail. I mean, I remember seeing at like the end of an NIH schedule, they were having a stillbirth conference, and like nobody was having stillbirth conferences. And I was like, what is this about? And then I made calls, and that kind of led to the story. So I'm not sure if this is helpful. I think there's no hard and fast rules. You can't really tell yourself, I'm going to do 40% this, something this. I think the main thing is to remember you're always working on one story that you think is important to you. You're kind of turning out those short order scrambled eggs and toast as they need it, but you're using your other time wisely. Too many reporters like give up too soon and say, well, I can't get somebody. But a lot of stories are, I think of them as like rivers underground. I mean, a lot of them have been there just quietly, and you could dip into them at any time. So you can like have one interview, and then maybe you think you're going to get back to it in 2 days and you don't. That's okay. 2 weeks later, get back to the person, say, look, I got slammed, So it's kind of improvisation. I feel like it's a little bit like jazz. And that's okay. There's no hard and fast rules. The main thing is just that every day you feel like you're doing something meaningful. And if you have a bad day or you have a bad week, don't give up, because you can do so much important work. And, I mean, given everything that's going on in the country, maybe it's not Watergate, maybe it's not January 6th, but I've had so many cases where you feel like that one story helped this one community or this one neighborhood or this one family, or sometimes it's just even one person. They'll take that story and they'll frame it and they'll laminate it, and they will remember forever the day you came and talked to them. And I just feel like if I helped one person, my whole life was worth it, So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
It also strikes me that like organization is really key. If you're kind of like dipping in and trying to snatch almost like stolen moments, that those files that you showed us about, here's what I've been working on for several years, like you need to be able to know kind of where you are in that story and what your running to-do list is, so that you don't sometimes, like if we have any sewers in the world, like if you have to get all your stuff out and remember where you are and whatnot, half hour goes by before you can actually start doing. So that organization sounds key as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Rebecca. I actually always keep manila folders on everyone. And when I open it up, I write down on the back of the front, like I have them here, like I'll write down on the back on the inside of here, like call this person, get Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, get the report from them, talk to, so that it's just all there. And then I would just like open it up and say, what do I need to do? I can still hear myself at the Sun. Somebody would say, well, that's going to take a long time. I won't be able to get that to you to 3 weeks. It's like, that's fine with me. I have plenty of other stories to do. I'm willing to, I'll wait you out. Don't you worry about it.
Persistence, always a key. So I know we're at 10:35. Are there any other questions? You can also get in touch with Diana or me and we'll follow up with you. But anyone else have a burning question they need to ask?
Yeah, if we have time for one more question. Thanks for your talk, Diana. It was super interesting, and I would love to get a list of book recommendations. But my question was about, I guess, getting access, because a lot of your work has been sort of telling these personal stories around medicine. And I feel like that's difficult to break into because hospitals and individuals have a lot of concerns about privacy when it comes to their medical issues. So I was wondering, how do you get that kind of access?
Yeah, I mean, sad to say that the PR industry has been alive and well for a long time, since before I became a reporter. So you always had to start out with PR people, and you always had to prove yourself as somebody who was accurate and, did responsible stories. So I would always start out being, just very kind and respectful and doing the stories and then finding things. And then I think it was different in different scenarios. Medicine was hardest with HIPAA, but sometimes you could get through. If you were interviewing a doctor about something, then you would ask them, well, do you have a patient? And then they would have to circle back to the PR. I mean, a lot of it's time. A lot of it is, are you willing? Is it a kind of a timeless story that it's okay if you don't do it tomorrow? And being persistent and just kind of staying on top of it, calling next week. Hey, were you able to get a hold of that patient? Hey, what did they say? Oh, well, they have to sign the paper and they don't want to sign the paper. Oh, that's okay. I'll run out with the form and get them to sign it. I'll drop it off at your office. So you have to essentially figure out the system and then work the system. And I think a lot of it is time and persistence. A piece that I did about families being allowed to go back into the emergency room during codes. I saw like a little letter to the editor in JAMA from a nurse saying like, my husband had a heart attack. He was taken to the hospital where I work at. they were back there trying to resuscitate him and they wouldn't let me in. And this was terrible. And I know for a fact, sometimes they let people in, and I think somebody did a study on it. So I was like, wow. So then I look it up and I find out there was a small study in Texas that they had done this. And so I interviewed the family, and it's like, oh my God, they talked about how I was there when my son was born. I want to be there when my son dies. He had fallen out of a tree on a snow day, got a 4th-degree liver laceration, and some prescient physician let them in, and they saw the doctors trying. And as horrific as it was, the study showed being there and seeing that is actually better than being in the waiting room and whatever you're imagining. And they actually like could know every possible thing was done. And, you know, they were just back against the wall, kind of sinking down, but then they were able to hold him at the end. So I hear this story. It's in Texas. It's kind of a small thing. There's no way I'm going to write the story for the Sun unless I figure out somebody. I started calling the main hospitals. No, we don't know if we do that, blah, blah, blah. Then I got permission from the PR people to talk to the head of the emergency rooms. And at one point I made a list of 24 hospitals in the state of Maryland. And I called every single head of every single emergency room and had a chat with them and said, do you guys do this? Do you know about this? Some did, some didn't. It was very casual. It was often by the instance. So what I said to them is, we'd really like to write about this. Can you put my name and number on a Post-it note, like on your computer? And if you guys get a case, will you like let me know? So I had that cooking for maybe like 6 months while I was doing other stories. And again, that's the kind of thing you could take 15 minutes and call like 3 hospitals. You have to just kind of give your pitch and what you're trying to do. In the end, I found one case on the Eastern Shore, but the most important case actually came from a PR person who had known me for several years, who said, I think there's a kid who came in and they let the mom in. And so then I had the line on the family, but then it was like, was the family going to talk about it? So I had to go out to them and explain to them this wasn't going to be a story about who Ryan was as a kid. This was going to be a story about what it was like for them to be there. And actually the dad barely got there in time, but the mom, he was a kid with cancer who had a recurrence, you know? So then he passed out at home. She rushes him in, and the key thing of the flux, the heartbeat of the story is the moment they're like flying that kid into the bay and trying to resuscitate him, and his shoe falls off, and the mom grabs his shoe, and traditionally those doors would be closed and she'd be holding on to that sneaker outside the door. But in that moment, the nurse opened the door and said, you come in with us. And so while they're trying to do all this, Dinah King's like climbing under all the wires and all that. But that was a long time to try to get to the Kings. And when I went to interview them, it was 8 o'clock on a Friday night, way out somewhere up 83. And I talked to them for 3 hours. It wasn't until 11 o'clock at night, we circled and circled and circled, that we got to the day he died. And then it turned out they had never talked to each other about it, the mother and the father. So it is difficult, but I guess what I'm trying to tell you guys is it can be done. And you're not going to get like 20 stories like that a year, but if you come across those little nuggets, like don't be defeated. Don't be defeated by the editor who says, oh, we already did that before, no one cares, or don't write another story about death. Because if a story is calling you, if you're feeling it, other people are feeling it too. Does that help?
What an amazing thing to end on, because it really is a lot about believing in yourself and your reporting instincts, and then putting in the dogged hard work and persistence to bring those stories to light. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. I feel like we have to lure you back, because there were so many points in your talk today where I was like, oh, I wish we could go deeper there, or I wish we could talk more. So I feel like we will have to do that. And once again, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to all you guys out there for being there. I'm telling you, hang in there. This is like the best job in the world. You know, it's a crazy world, but you can make differences in small ways. So, onward.
Well, thank you, Diana. And I'm sure you've made a difference in a big way for the people on this call today. And I've just been thinking you're an amazing source of information and inspiration. And that's an unbeatable combination. And you share so much from things that you've already done. You're not talking theoretically about maybe this would work or maybe that would work, but like the story you just told, it's so compelling and so illustrative of how you can make a difference and what you have to do to get that story at times. So thank you. Please come back. We'll work with you on that.
Okay, sounds good, everybody. You guys have a great day. Thank you for being